Many people from my mother's village were leaving to come to the UK. So she grew up in a village called Nani Petan, which is near Navsari, very near to Surat. And a lot of them were migrating and coming to the UK. And obviously the UK always had a very strong connection to the Indians because of colonial rule. And it was always seen as a better life for individuals. So my mother persuaded my dad to apply for a work permit because he was a double graduate. The work permit came in within weeks. He didn't actually leave India until I think the work permit was about to expire. And then he came, I think, in February 1964. So I was born after my father came to the UK. So he came alone, and my mother then brought us 4 children up alone back in India. Obviously she was pregnant with me. So she went back to her parents' house and stayed there.
So he lived with my mama in Wembley, and then he worked as a administrator at one of the local companies in Alperton on a £12 a week wage. He would save his money, and he would also write for a group of newspapers in India and earn in Indian rupees, which he would send, or they would send directly to my mother. And then he saved up enough money to buy a house in North Wembley on Peel Road, and just before we arrived in 1967.
And he'd also be writing for a newspaper, a daily newspaper back in Gujarat, and his column was called Thames Nitirati, which means from the banks of the River Thames. And it's a weekly column just about life in Britain. It was very hugely popular back in India. To this day, we have people coming to us and saying, I used to read your dad's column some 50 odd years ago.
Yeah, it became very famous.
Yeah. So the Indian High Commissioner at the time was a man called Dr. Jivraj Mehta. So he was one of the towering figures of the independence struggle. He was Gandhiji's personal physician, so he was a man of vision. He was also the first Chief Minister of Gujarat State. So he was posted here as the High Commissioner when my father was here. And my father built quite a close relationship with him, and he said to my father that you should start a newspaper here in the UK because the community needs a focal point to come together. And if you don't, also to help the community that they don't forget their language or their culture. So my father said, I don't have any money. So he introduced him to some prominent Indians here at the time, collected some advance subscriptions, and then with my mother started the paper from a small terraced house in Wembley as a black and white cyclostyled handwritten news sheet on 1st of April 1968.
Father loved Britain, so he loved the British quality of respect and just the fact that you could have a very good education here. So the first thing was that we had to have a very good education, and that was what was ingrained in our upbringing. My father was always about helping others, and so was my mother. So on immigration issues or just people not being treated with respect, as he started Garvi Gujarat, he would then take up causes for a lot of people, and especially if people came to him and were stranded at Heathrow Airport, he would go, not take a penny, and some of the people he helped became lifelong friends of his. And he always told us that you have to treat every human being with respect. Doesn't matter if they don't have money, because through his own lived experience, that if somebody came to him wanting something, whether it's money or help, he would help them. And he then would talk about his own personal experience that, look, people don't really regard poor people and just don't really help them. So whether it's racism or whether it's poverty, he would always help people. And that's just the way he was. My father was relentless in serving the community and his readers. And everything revolved around that. It was all about what was good for his readers. And that's why I think when Garvi Gujarat was started in 1968 on 1st of April, it actually took off. It was just incredible, because within the space of 4 years, he bought a bigger house. Within the space of 8 years, he bought a 17,000 square foot building in central London. He didn't even need all that space. He just needed 2,000 square feet. That all came from subscriptions from people buying Garvi Gujarat. And I remember when we were growing up, we would all contribute. So it would be printed somewhere else, come home, we would fold the copies, and Salish, because of his technical skills, would cut sellotape, because that's all he could do in those days. And then another one of us kids would wrap the newspaper with an address label and stick the sellotape on, and then we would post it in the local red letterbox. And then somebody told my father that it's probably better that he goes to main post office, register as a newspaper. So everything he learned was on the job itself. And it was incredible how many people he helped on that journey and how many relationships he made. And none of it was on the basis of he had a hidden agenda. It was just about helping the community and serving the people. And he didn't matter, and also he respected all people. It didn't matter what religion they were. How he built that readership, going door to door, and he did it himself. So he would, on the weekends, meet people, talk to them at Garvi Gujarat, and they would give him money to subscribe to the newspaper. Then he'd come back, he would look for articles, he'd talk to people for articles, and then he would sell advertising, putting the whole paper to bed. And my mother was the backbone, because she would then collect all the stories, have it all typeset, printed, proofread, and then put the pages together in terms of designing it. And then she would help out in actually distributing it. So she was instrumental. She was what the things that people don't see. She took care of all of that. We didn't know any different. Yeah. It was just the whole culture was always just doing
we grew up
something.
around the newspaper. So as you were saying, in the front room you had these lead type, in the front room. So the whole house was full of equipment and paraphernalia for the newspaper.
And lots of newspapers.
Yeah, just lots of newspapers. So it was part of our life. We grew up with a newspaper.
So when a journalist wrote about my father, he said, Salish and I grew up at the knee of my father, and we have ink in our blood. So we've known no different. So it's not about comparing a lifestyle with somebody else's, it's just the way it was.
He wrote extensively about, let's say, the fight for equality and justice. So if there were tough immigration laws that came out, he wasn't afraid to criticize the government in terms of how unjust those immigration laws were. He even solved a murder case, and just writing about the community and how they're progressing, celebrating the success of the community as they progressed, from employment into running their own businesses, dominating certain business sectors. If they went into the public sector, just celebrating the success of the community in different areas, but also, as a champion for the community as well.
We look back at his history and it's incredible what he's achieved.
Yeah, a giant in terms of his journalism, because in the Gujarati language, he is probably one of the best and leading Gujarati journalists. He's won many, many prizes for his mastery of the language. I mean, the essence of the success of Garvi Gujarat is his mastery of the language. How he knew how to develop a news story, his nose for the news, how to craft those stories that engage with the community. And that, in essence, that's what journalists do. And he knew that very, very well. And, from the small story to a big story, he always had huge enthusiasm for that. And he'd always take a story forward. He'd investigate it himself. He'd always be on the phone ringing up, whether it's a crime or whatever. He would call the detective in charge, try and understand what's happening, and give his readers the very best. And his focus was always the reader. And he believed every column inch of the newspaper had to give the very best to the readers. And that, in essence, was the success of the newspaper. A young Gujarati Muslim woman called Ruqayya Bibi, her body was found in the River Thames, just floating in the River Thames. And the detective in charge, a guy called Detective John Swain, has actually written about this in a book called Being Informed. There's a whole chapter on this murder, and in it he says that the crime was ultimately solved because of the enthusiasm of a journalist called Ramniklal Solanki. So the police didn't really know much about. They identified the body because she was reported missing, and they interviewed the family, the husband and the husband's brother. because of some language difficulties, they couldn't really understand. But the detective had a feeling that everything wasn't right in that case. So my father, was in touch with the detective. He kept on calling him to understand any progress on the case, and the case kind of just stood still. They didn't have any leads. So after my father spoke to him, he said, "Well, do you mind if I go and interview the family?" And the detective says, "Well, I don't mind, but keep me informed of exactly what's happening." So my father went into their house and interviewed the family, the two brothers. But every time he tried to talk about the murder, the murder of the young woman, they tried to steer the conversation away, and he just couldn't make any headway. So he felt there was something not right here. But after a deep conversation with them, and after he left the house and just talking to them, he managed to get a confession out of them that we know who murdered the girl, but they've gone off to India. So he reported this back to the police, and they then checked all their records about, if any families between the dates she was murdered had gone back to India. There was no evidence of that at all. So the detective knew from the confession that my father got from them that then they interviewed them, and eventually they got a confession that I think it was the brother-in-law and the husband that murdered the woman.
But during that time of interviewing the family, my father put his life at risk, because as he was getting closer and closer to the truth, there was a stage where when he went in, one of the last times, he was quite nervous about going into the family home to interview them.
And threatened him, I think.
Yeah, but my father didn't know that police were outside, undercover, in vans, in case something happened to my father. But he didn't know that. He still put his life in danger to uncover the truth, which is remarkable. He actually solved the murder because it was his relentless journalism in talking to the various family members and getting a confession. I mean, how easy is it to get a confession? It is extremely difficult. And this is without using torture, right? This is just talking to somebody, which could be torturous, I suppose, but it was just the way he did it and his style of talking to people and his style of journalism that he managed to get a confession.
And he won the Reporter of the Year award in India for that story.
Yeah.
So when Asian Trader came about, my father wanted to create a better understanding between retailers, wholesalers, and the suppliers and manufacturers. And the magazine did that because we were a conduit messaging between the two. And then he actually recognized that the Asian community have business in their blood. They were running, turning shops that weren't very profitable into successful enterprises. So he wanted to recognize that success and then bring people together. So he started the Asian Trader Awards in 1989. And before that, you would never see any kind of recognition for the South Asian community. He did it in a focused way for the convenience sector, but that was the first time you could see the English community celebrating the success of the South Asian community, applauding them on stage for how they've actually run their businesses very successfully.
So that's what my father's legacy is, in the sense that he started Asian Trader to bring people together and also recognizing their contributions. So before, suppliers would not really take account. Now they pay money to actually recognize good retailers. And retailers know that. They have the confidence that actually, doesn't matter how big an organization it is, they don't have to. We didn't have an English language publication in our portfolio. So when the opportunity arose, we bought Eastern Eye, we bought India Weekly, Asian Times, Pakistan Weekly, Sri Lanka Weekly, and a host of others. We bought the Asian Rich List, Asian Business Awards. So we bought quite a lot of assets around that time. And it became available because they didn't invest in journalism. And this is what we've done. So Solish pays quite close attention to the day-to-day content of our publications, and it's that investment in journalism is the legacy for my father, because he was one of the greatest journalists in Gujarati language. It is to provide information and news that the reader wants or the reader wants to read about, and this is what we continue to do.
So when we bought the title, it was a red top. So its focus was a very small subsection of the Asian community. So once we took it over, we obviously invested in journalists. We broadened its outlook to appeal to a more professional audience. And I think that's been quite successful, because it is today the biggest selling South Asian English language newspaper. But it contains everything of interest for the South Asian community. So if you look at just general news, news from the Indian subcontinent, we get big interviews with all the prime ministers and cabinet ministers, CEOs, sports section, strong arts and culture section. And then we do investigations as well. We investigate different sectors, look at injustice, prejudice, discrimination, and we've been doing investigations into various sectors of British life.
Friends of my father had been to America and said the Asian community is growing in America, and the community will need a voice like Garvi Gujarat in America. We then, I think Sailesh, you went first, didn't you, with Papa in '96? Did you go? You go with Swamiji?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
You took the exploratory trip first, didn't you, to New York?
Was it me? Okay.
Yeah.
So
he went with my parents to America as an exploratory trip to just see what the market was like, to map out if there is an opportunity to launch a US edition of Garvi Gujarat. And a lot of the community in the US had travelled there from East Africa, the UK, and then settled in the US. Just by chance, they also happened to run most of the motels. And so just when they were moving around the US, he found that he had a lot of friends and the brand was quite well known in the US. So it was really quite an easy decision to take, that there is an opportunity here to launch Garvi Gujarat. And not just launch it, because there were papers sold in the US, but from India. So there wasn't really a US-based Indian newspaper, Gujarati newspaper. So then we launched it so we launched the US edition first in 1992 in New York. And it was a big success because there was a huge need for a Gujarati newspaper. The paper grew quite rapidly, again, because of his journalism. I think his legacy really is to build the publishing group that we have today, the biggest Asian publishing house in the UK, reaching the millions of readers that we reach. But also to sustain that over 55 years is quite something. And to be the editor for until he passed away. So that's a huge legacy. But in terms of the wider legacy, it's the recognition that the South Asian community have today, the success that we enjoy, and chronicle that success. Over, if you look at business, the Asian community are known for business, but the success we enjoy is part of that, the way my father paved that way for success. And we see that success now at all levels of British society. You have a British Asian Prime Minister, which he never would have thought would happen. I never would have thought we'd have that in our lifetime. But it's the acceptance of the South Asian community.
My father was a man of the time. He was required by the community, and the community shaped him. And so, like a freedom fighter, when India sought its independence, they had a number of freedom fighters. My father was a man of that time. And so, if you look at the community, what would it have been like without my father? It wouldn't be recognized. It wouldn't have the power, the foundation that we have today, because his whole journey is about bringing them together and giving them a voice. We wouldn't have had that voice. We'd all been disparate communities, somebody in Leicester not being able to communicate with somebody in London. So his life is demonstrated through that this whole journey with what he's built right now and what we as a community take for granted.
I think he certainly carved out a niche because of his background. So there was a need, and he carved out that niche and built a very successful newspaper. But I think what you're asking is, did he find it more difficult to progress because of the colour of his skin? And I think he did, because I don't think, let's say, the agencies of government, the government itself, mainstream organisations, it's always a battle to get your voice heard, and they tend to ignore the Asian press or the ethnic press. So that was a constant battle, and we still face that battle today, to make them understand the importance of the South Asian community and obviously of, by definition, our press. So you're always fighting to get that recognition, and it stems from ignorance, I guess, that these organisations don't really think about these ethnic communities.
Yeah, I think everything that we've said is about his journey of bringing people together, and from when the community wasn't represented, minimum numbers, to what it is today. That's, I think, his story and his success.
He's a pioneer of journalism, ethnic journalism in this country. It didn't really exist until he came, so he started one of the first ethnic publications in the UK. And if you look previous to that, there were hardly any papers. And to sustain that paper over 6 decades is quite an achievement. A pioneer of the community itself, one of the first in this country, paving the way for other generations. And I think, second, third generation have all built on his success.
So everything he's done is just part of our DNA. So, because we've just witnessed what he's done right from the time when we were young boys to what we do today, which is engagement, good quality content, and just expanding that into different markets. So we're expanding in America, we'll expand into Canada, we'll expand into Middle East. And I think the greatest legacy will be when we start expanding into India itself. So that'll be a homecoming.
But I think it's projects like this, paying tribute to his legacy, the Pioneers project that Southampton University are doing, to tell the journey of these really courageous men and women who came to this country and built successful lives. And it's really important to chronicle that story for future generations to understand the huge sacrifices that they made. We wouldn't be, as a community, as successful as we are if it wasn't for that generation. And this project actually just speaks to that.
Yeah, and the project is all about how the pioneers, what they experienced, and so the generation, our kids and their kids, learn that this is what happened before, and the mistakes that were made, and how to be able to build a career for yourself in an organization or in public service, whether it's as a doctor, or as a politician, or as a professor, or as a business person. I think all of that stems from the first steps the pioneers took in this country.